Hi everybody. Welcome to the SoCal PowerShell user group. Tonight we have Stephen Valdinger with us tonight. He's a senior solutions engineer with Chocolatey Software, and he's going to talk to us all about generating documentation with PowerShell. So, Stephen, without further ado, go ahead and take it away.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here and give this talk. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And can I move that? Yeah, I can. Perfect. So I think that user experience starts at the docs when they first hit your repository, right? They're looking for something, they need some kind of a tool, maybe a module, maybe a utility, whatever that thing is, and they search for it and they land on your GitHub page. The very first thing they're going to see is probably your README. And it needs to be pretty descriptive, right? It needs to explain what the thing is, how to get it, how it works, what you can do with it, all that stuff. It starts in the README. From there, the stuff that your module does, since this is a PowerShell user group, we'll stick to PowerShell modules. The stuff that your module does needs to have good documentation as well. Now, there is commandlet-based help, which is available inside of the shell as you're using the thing. You can run git help, whatever your function is, and then you have the option to say examples, full, detailed, parameters, whatever. All that stuff is available right there in the shell. There's another flag for git help as well that's really, really great, and that's the online parameter. And what that will do is if you've defined a help URI or a link in your comment-based help, and you've written that comment-based help and published it to a website of some form, we're going to use Git pages or GitHub pages in our example tonight. But if you've got your own, like a blog or your own website or whatever, if you're publishing your documentation there, that online switch can open that page in a browser for them automatically. And the great benefit of that is it's out of your way at that point, right? You can be using the code, trying to figure out how this thing works in the shell, and you can have the documentation open for that command on another screen or side by side or what have you. It's out of your way, but it's still accessible. That's a really, really, really great feature to add to your PowerShell modules. And the even better thing about it is you don't really have to lift a finger to make it work. What we're going to look at tonight is a couple of utilities that you can add to your tool belt that allow you to do this stuff on the fly, so that as you're building your stuff and you've got your CI/CD pipelines, building your modules and publishing your modules for you, the next logical step is to let your pipeline do the help for you as well, at least that online-based help. This is all going to hinge on the fact that you have really good comment-based help already defined in your scripts. But really, if we take a step back and think about it, your script's not done until that's done anyways. So the kingpin to all of this working is your comment-based help. And for those folks that aren't familiar with comment-based help, we're going to dive into some code here and take a look and explain exactly what that is. So I've got a GitHub repository here called Beautiful Docs. It's just an example repository. I've got a source folder, and I've split out my PowerShell, my functions for this module from the rest of the code, and then my build pipeline takes care of the rest. It's going to make my PSM1 and make sure that everything loads and all the fun stuff that makes a PowerShell module a module. I don't really care about any of that in my repository. I'm going to let my build pipeline take care of all that stuff for me. So when I'm writing my code, I can just focus on writing the code. And I've got a couple of helper functions in here that I just keep laying around in my PowerShell profile. But I've gone ahead and I've just pulled them into here to make a quick module to prove the point that writing good docs doesn't have to be hard. And if we look in here, this top example here where this big code comment, In PowerShell, this is the comment-based help section. So in here, we've got a really, really simple one. These can be more complex if you want them to be, absolutely. So a synopsis, a real quick one-liner that explains what this function does. Description, I've just copied the synopsis, but you can go into more detail here about this particular function if you want to. And then if there's multiple parameters, what those parameters are, their types, on all that good information about that parameter goes in a parameter block, and then some examples as well. And you can have as many examples as you want. We're just going to stick with the basics and do one here. There are other nodes that you can add inside of here, like a notes node if you want. And then to make the online help work, there are two different ways to do it, and there's neither of those ways inside of here right now. So let me remove the notes. The first way is to add a link. Now, in comment-based help, the first .link item is going to be the link that Get Help Online uses. So if you've got multiple links inside of here, the first one is going to be the one that Online Help uses. The rest of them will just be links that the Online Help, you can click on them and they'll go there. I don't prefer doing it this way. I prefer using the commandlet binding. So if we come in here and we do a help URI inside of here equals, and then we can put whatever our docs are slash open get repo, whatever that URL happens to be. This is the other way that you can define those help URIs, and this is the way that I prefer doing it. It's just less confusing to me. Using a help URI, it's very clearly defined that, hey, this is the help URI. This must be what GetHelp-Online is going to use. And then for the links up here, I might have a couple of different commandlets, right? I might have a get commandlet, I might have a set commandlet, I might have a new commandlet, I might have a remove commandlet. So if I'm in the get commandlet, I might have links to set, new, and remove, and swap those out. If I'm in remove, I might have get, set, and new, etc., as links, so that you can really quickly on the online help jump back and forth between all of the different flavors of that particular commandlet. So that's the comment-based help. And in Visual Studio Code, which is what we're using here, and I'm using it in the browser with the new github.dev domain thing. And if you're not familiar with what that looks like or how to use that, let's just do that real quick. So if you're out in any repo, just hit period on your keyboard. And it'll open it up in Visual Studio Code right in your browser. It's slicker and all get out. It's pretty cool. But Visual Studio Code has this cool thing called, what are they, snippets? So if you don't have comment-based help and you hit pound, it's not going to do it in here, is it? Let me open it up in a regular PowerShell window. So I've got another PowerShell window here. Let me just cut it out of here, for example. There. If you hit pound in Visual Studio Code, it'll put that snippet in for you, and then you can just start typing whatever you want. Makes it really, really quick to add comment-based help to your stuff because it'll scaffold out exactly what you have defined in your commandlet binding. So if you've got 30 parameters, it's going to have a block for each one of your parameters. Now, it's only ever going to have one example, and it'll always have a notes field, but it will at least scaffold out all of your parameters and stuff for you as well. So it makes it pretty quick to get started with this stuff. And like I said, the Get Help Online stuff all relies on you having good comment-based help. So the next thing that I want to look at is how do we get our comment-based help that's in our PowerShell scripts into a format that works well for the web, right? And I know what you're probably thinking, and I was thinking the same thing. Markdown is a good way to do it because you could just store those Markdown files on a GitHub repository and link to the files on the GitHub repository, and it looks good. That's a way to do it. It's perfectly valid. And the Platypus module, which is owned by the PowerShell team now, is a great way to get that done. So the Platypus module takes a module. So say this is the module that we're going to generate help for. You say new Markdown help, your module, and where you want to store it. And it goes through all of the commands that are available in that module and takes their comment-based help and turns it into Markdown. It's a thing of beauty. You don't have to really worry about anything outside of developing your module. Because remember, your comment-based help is part of your development process. Your scripts aren't done until that's done. You can also use this against compiled modules as well. If you want to use external help, you can do those sorts of things with it as well. But regular old PowerShell modules written in PowerShell, it works great for that stuff as well. But this is a really super flexible tool that can be really used in any situation, no matter what kind of PowerShell you're writing. And then, of course, later on, you can update your Markdown help. If you make updates to it as well, you can run update Markdown help and what output folder you want to run it against. That's fine as well. And you can also do things ad hoc. So you can say new Markdown help command and just give it the name of a single command as well to just generate Markdown help for that one single thing if you wanted to. So maybe you've not got a module, but you've got a script that you've stored somewhere and you want to put documentation for that script up in like Confluence or something like that for the rest of your team to be able to reference it. Well, new Markdown help command, whatever your script file is, or the function inside of your script file once you load it, will allow you to do that really, really quickly. But we're still not native to the web yet, right? We've got some Markdown files. That's great. But the web runs on HTML, JavaScript, CSS, all that good jazz. Enter MakeDocs. MakeDocs is this cool, magic little utility written in Python that does just that. It's a static site generator. It takes those Markdown files that we used or that we generated using Platypus and generates static HTML and CSS content out of those Markdown files, and you can have a ton of themes available for it as well. So there's a bunch of themes out here on the third-party theme site that you can look for. Read the Docs is the one that we're going to use for our demo, and the one that I use all the time because it's just a beautiful documentation type theme. But there are others if you want to go out and look. There's tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of them if you want something different. Oops, I probably shouldn't have closed that tab. Oh, I don't think I can reopen that tab. Huh, interesting. Yeah, can't reopen close tabs in incognito mode apparently. All right, that's fine. But that's MakeDocs. So that's all the pieces and parts that we're going to use to glue this together, right? We're going to write good PowerShell that's going to have comment-based help in it. We're going to have a CI/CD pipeline that takes the module that the pipeline produces and uses Platypus to generate our Markdown help files. And then we're going to take those Markdown files and generate a static website for them using MakeDocs. And then MakeDocs has another cool utility. I'm going to pull that back up and go to the Getting Started guide. and building the site or going to deploy. Yeah, we're going to go to deploying. Here we go. MakeDocs has a built-in command called /deploy that does all the work for you of creating a GH Pages branch on your repository and wiring up the GitHub Pages stuff to just magically work. You don't have to do anything else. Behind the scenes, if you're pushing code to your repository, MakeDocs is just going to use that git config that you've already got configured and set up to do the deployment. So you don't have to worry about credentials or anything like that special if you're doing it locally. Now, in an Azure Pipelines or a GitHub Action or something like that, you will have to do a little bit of tweaking, and I'll show you what that looks like once we dive into the pipeline, such that MakeDocs is able to, inside of your pipeline, push back to your repository, because it's not going to have that git config for it to just magically pick up and use and everything's happy. So you have to baby it a little bit. But that's a relatively painless process to do that. And I've got all the code in this repository as well for you to look at and reference later if you want to implement this in your own environments. And before I dive into the pipeline stuff, I'm going to pause right there. Matt, if there's any questions or anything like that flowing through from the chat, now is a good time to pause and ask any of those, because I did just fire through a whole bunch of different tools and utilities. So, all right, sounds like there's no questions. Going to dive into this Azure pipeline. So I've got two. Let me just show this. If I go to all, I've got two flavors of this pipeline. I've created a GUI-based version and then a YAML-based version. And the YAML is just a copy of the GUI so that I can store the YAML file in source control later. But building a pipeline from scratch, I always opt to go for the GUI first to get it right, test it, make sure it works. And then I copy that YAML out, put it in source control, and then as I need to change things over time, I just use the YAML from that point forward. But it's way easier to use the GUI to generate the YAML than it is to remember how to write the YAML from scratch. So we'll go into the GUI one and we'll click at it. And then we'll look at all the different steps. So I'm using Module Builder to build my actual PowerShell module. It allows me to not really have to think about much. It's going to handle all of the dirty work for me. So I need this command to be able to install it onto the agent whenever it's building the module. So just a real quick install module for that. And then I'm going to use Chocolatey to get the rest of the components and tools that I'm going to need to actually run through and be successful with this pipeline. So we're going to grab Git version, we're going to grab MakeDocs, and we're going to grab the Platypus PowerShell module. Now I could use the PowerShell gallery to install the Platypus PowerShell module, but at the time of building this pipeline, the gallery was down and it was really grinding my gears. So I looked and we happened to have the Platypus PowerShell module up on the community repository for Chocolatey. So I just decided to go that route. That way I always have it when I need it. So you might want to do the same thing. I looked for Module Builder. We don't have that one. If anybody wants to maintain that package though, that would be a good one. And next we use Git version. So Git version is a really, really, really smart utility. It is black magic, basically. I don't fully understand how it works, but it uses the commit history and the tags and the metadata from the repository to assert a version for that particular build when the pipeline runs, and it takes tags as precedent. So if you tag something as like a version 030, for example, get version is going to assert a symver of whatever that tag is. However, if you don't have tags and you've got a previous version of 021 based on the commit history in that previous version, get version is going to say, oh, we were on 021. I'm going to assert that this is now 022 and move on. And there is a YAML file that you can use to control different aspects of get version and how it works. But in this example, I'm not doing anything fancy. I'm just installing get version onto the agent with this setup step, and then I'm executing get version with this step that will give me a pipeline variable that I can use later, and we'll use it right here in build module. So again, I've installed this module builder command or function module, and I'm going to use the build.ps1 that I've written with the build parameter, and I'm going to pass the build module function the symver. So if we look in my build script, I have a build switch. And if we look at build, all it's doing is passing build module and the symver. And build module has all the glue code underneath it to find my PSD1 and my PSM1 and generate a PSM1 if I need one, and all of that good stuff that's required. Build module takes care of that for me. I don't really have to think about it. And if I look at the build.psd1, this is what build module is looking for. So it's going to say, hey, for all of my source directories, my public and my private, I'm going to dot source those things in and update the PSD1 with those functions, and then create the PSM1 and all that good stuff to go along with it. So it's a very, very helpful module. It makes it really simple to build PowerShell stuff if you're not familiar. And then the next step that we do, once I've built that module, I go ahead and I just save it back as an artifact to the pipeline. There's no real purpose for this other than having something that I can look at. If a later step fails, I can at least go back and see what the pipeline saw to make sure that I didn't do something wrong in the code. It just makes diagnosing things for me easier. In production, you probably wouldn't necessarily need this step, although it is kind of a nice to have to go back through historical runs of your pipeline and have that artifact there for review if you need it. And then the next run of the pipeline is going to invoke that platypus module. And it's going to, again, use my build script and run this write MD doc switch. And if we take a look at what that does, it's right here. So we're saying, hey, if I don't have, or basically if the module folder didn't get created like I expect it to, it's going to no op basically. But if it does exist, I'm going to find this, and actually I don't think I even need this. This is the important bit. I think I got copy and paste happy from something else. But this is the important bit for writing the markdown docs. Import the newly created module. And actually that's what this is doing. So add that output folder to the module path, and then import the module now that it's on the module path, and then import platypus module, and then run new markdown help against that module that we just loaded and store it in a docs folder right here. And you'll notice in the repository, I only have an index.md. I don't care about the markdown coming from the module. I don't need it. I'm not going to use it. I'm letting the pipeline handle all of my online documentation for me. So it gets built in the pipeline, and when that machine goes away after the job's done, that folder goes away with it. So that's generating the markdown documentation using Platypus. And then I use MakeDocs to build the static website using this MakeDocs publish switch. And if we look at what this does, I have a template file, and we'll look at what that looks like. So in this MakeDocs template folder, this is really all you need to configure for MakeDocs. You give it a name, which shows up in the title bar. You give it what theme you want to use, the repo URL, and the docs directory. So in this example, back out of this directory into the docs folder, that's where all the documentation lives. And if we look logically at the pipeline, all of my comment-based help just got put into that documentation folder in the previous step. So MakeDocs has all of that stuff available as well to process. So if we go back here and look at this, we're going to set my location to that module templates folder. And then we're going to give MakeDocs the build argument. And we're going to pass it the MakeDocs executable and that build argument here. This is a really nice trick for working with PowerShell and native commands, because native commands in PowerShell can be a little bit finicky, to say the least. So if you build an array of all the parameters that you want to pass to that native command, you can then splat that array to whatever your binary is, and then you can just invoke that binary with the ampersand signal. It's a pretty bulletproof way of dealing with native commands in PowerShell if you're not familiar with what this line is actually doing. So what this is going to do is generate the static site, basically. So under this, there will be a site folder get created, and inside of that site folder will be all of the HTML, CSS, and all the goodies that actually make the site and the site. And once that's generated, we need to write all that information to GitHub pages. We need to publish this site. And that's what the final step does with this -gh pages switch on the build script. So if we look back at our build script, here's that GH pages block. And this is where I said you have to trick Git a little bit on a build runner to work the way you expect it to. Now, if you're using a hosted agent that's on-prem in your environment and you've got Git configured on that agent to work to be able to push code to your repository, this won't be needed. You don't have to worry about it. It's only in situations where the agent installs Git, but it's not configured. Like, yeah, it works. You can clone things, but pushing is going to be a problem because it doesn't know your username, your email. It's not associated with you or in any way, and doesn't know or have rights to your repository. So the way to trick it is to configure the username and email, remove the origin. So this is automatically going to get pulled down by the pipeline itself, because the pipeline has to check out the code. So it adds your repository URL as the origin, as the very, very, very first step of your pipeline. If you look, get sources, that's doing a git checkout, setting up the remote, all that good stuff. So we'll remove that, and then you can craft a special URL that has a personal access token or a PAT inside of it that will allow things like pushing and pulling to work based on the rights that you've given that token. So I've got an environment variable configured called GitHub token, and I've set up a token for this user group with rights to the repository to push new branches and all that good stuff. So basically any kind of repo and workflow access has been granted to this token. And then I craft that special URL saying, hey, my Git username is Stevie Coaster, and separated by a colon is my token at github.com. So it's basically a credential in the URL at this point, and then my GitHub username and my repository. And then I add back my origin URL using the newly crafted one. And then I say, hey, MakeDocs, go ahead and deploy this up to my GitHub Pages branch. And force just allows me to overwrite anything that might already exist there. And once you're done, once you've ran your pipeline, I'm going to go ahead and trigger this. Let's just queue this. I should have queued this a few minutes ago, but thankfully it doesn't take super, super long to run. Well, hopefully it decides to kick off at some point. There it goes. All right, so it's going to check out. It's going to do, yeah, see. You might be able to see it. Yeah. So there's that git add origin that it did as the very first step. And then later on when we get down here, we'll take that out and replace it with that other URL. It looks like module builder got installed. This one's going to take a little bit. But while this is running, at the end of all of this, you've ran through your pipeline, you've got all of this done. You get this. This is the end result of that pipeline running. I ran this earlier this evening just so it would definitely be here, barring the demo gods being angry with me, but so far they've been all right. So this is the landing page for the documentation site, and this is built from the index.md file that I do keep in the repository. Since this is relatively static, this isn't going to change with the code as the code changes. This I keep in the repository so I can update it as I go. So this is the index.md file rendered out in MakeDocs. And if you right click, can I view the page source? You can see it's all HTML. So MakeDocs has taken that markdown and created nice HTML content for me. And if we look at the open git repo function, this is what that now looks like once it's on the web. And if it was a really, really, really long file, you could have different links, and it would jump to those different links on the page. And it does that for all of them. You can kind of see how it jumps around a little bit here. And yeah, that related link section at the bottom, that's where all those links come in the comment-based help. So if there was a get, a set, and a new, you could have links to those as well. And then this is the final one, the set non-domain routing, remoting. But it's really, really nice to be able to just let your build pipeline generate your documentation for you. Here's my Nexus shell module, and here's all the stuff that's in this module. I really don't want to have to write all of this stuff, like all the help for all of these things. There's like 100 and some commandlets in here or something silly like that. I didn't write a single line of any of this. A build pipeline did it for me. And that's the power of bolting a couple of tools together that really lets you take your PowerShell modules to the next level, especially if you're looking to produce something that you share with the community. You've either open sourced something or you've got internal teams that you want to share your code with those teams. Give them a way to really learn about your tools and be effective with your tools. Because there's nothing more frustrating than finding something that you think is going to be great, but the docs suck and you can't figure out how to use it. So you go and find something else. Make it so people don't go and find something else. Make sure they stay with you and your thing and are extremely successful with using your thing. And again, documentation is the beginning of the user experience journey. And let's just check on that. Yeah, the pipeline ran. So this is the most up-to-date version of those docs at this point. You'll notice that it's going to steviecoaster.dev/beautiful docs. That's because I've set up a custom domain on GitHub for all of my stuff. It's a different, I can't remember. It's like getpages.io or githubpages.io or something like that for a regular repository. But if you've got your own domain and you want to add it to Get Pages, it's a pretty simple process. I think you have to go through your settings here, I believe. I don't remember where it's at. Yeah, off the top of my head, I don't remember where it's at. But you can set your own custom domain here, and then the repository name just gets added to the end. And you can see here that the GitHub Pages branch is the one that the documentation is being built from. And I think if we go back to the code and we switch to here, yeah, here's what that code looks like. You never have to know what it is or care about what it is. It just magics its way over here and works. So you've got all of your HTML code, you've got your CSS and your fonts and your JavaScript. All of that good stuff is just in here for you. It's black magic and it's wonderful. So that's my spiel. Are there any questions about any of this whatsoever? I'm more than happy to field some questions because I can't see anything.
Yeah, I'm watching chat. If anybody wants to drop something in there, that's fine, or you can feel free to speak up. We're not shy.
I hope it was at least a little bit useful.
I got a question.
Sure.
When you're doing examples in your documentation, how do you deal with PowerShell's desire to split lines weirdly? Or is that not
inside of like this stuff?
Yeah, like when you have an example that really needs to be on multiple lines.
If it's anything longer than 2 parameters, my examples use splatting. That's my general rule of thumb. Just to make that look a little cleaner. So if there was, if we go in here and look at, I don't really have a great, I mean, this one might be okay. to look at, but since this one's a little bit longer, I might say something like removes args equals and give it a hash table and say package source equals C temp package.
Okay, so this works with those multiple line examples like that pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have any problems with it.
Yeah, no, none whatsoever. It works really, really well with that stuff. Because if you look, actually, you know, I think I published the actual docs for my Nexus shell module up onto the website, just so they are there. Let me go.
How do you usually title your example if you feel like it needs one?
I just give it a little blurb about what it's going to do. If I feel like it needs one. Very rarely do I actually use one. Let's look at repository and NuGet hosted repository. So if we look inside of here, this is code fenced. So if I look at raw, Platypus is going to code fence it like this around the entire example. And that makes it render really, really nicely when you're viewing it just as Markdown. But then when you get to this, and we go to the same thing, where is NuGet? This is the one annoyance that I haven't figured out how to fix, is these auto expand when you go to them. But they look just as good when they're HTML as well. MakeDocs respects the code fences really, really well. So if you've got a really, really long one, like I said, if it's longer than 2, typically is where I'll cut it off and say, nope, not going to do more than that. I'm going to splat it from there. But you can even see in here, I don't have any like titles for my examples. I could if I wanted to, but I try and make the examples as self-explanatory as I can, because PowerShell is pretty verbose by default, just in the nature of PowerShell being very verb now. So that is typically what I do. I've got a question in here. Splatting. Can I please explain splatting? Sure. So there is in PowerShell functions, commandlets, they have parameters, right? You can say new item, and let's just do it. Let's just do it live for kicks and giggles, right? So can everybody see this shell? Is that big enough for folks? Hopefully that's big enough. So if I were to just do a real quick dir test inside of here and cd into test and do an ls, there's nothing inside of here. The PowerShell way to create a directory is the new item commandlet. You give it a path. We'll say dot. You give it a name, and we'll say demo. And then there's other stuff that you can do as well. So item type as well. This is going to be a directory. I'm going to force the creation of it. You can see how eventually, as I start adding stuff to this, it's going to get really, really, really long and start to wrap relatively quickly, and just it gets super confusing on what you're doing. Splatting allows you to take a hash table of all the parameters and feed it to the commandlet. So if I were to do this, I would say folder args, for example, and give it a hash table of all the stuff that new item accepts that I want to use. So for example, I'm going to say path is equal to pwd for current working directory. And I want to use the name, or no, I want to use value for, nope, I do want to use name equals demo, and item type equals directory. And for these are all strings. So remember, you're in a hash table, key value pairs. Keys on the left don't need quotes around them unless they include spaces. Everything on the right, unless it's a variable, needs quotes around it. And maybe I want to do what if on this as well. So what if is a switch, right, in PowerShell. So to tell the hash table that I'm passing what if, I'm going to set it to true. So if you want to use a switch parameter on the command, set it to true inside of your hash table. So now I have that folder args. So if we look at it again, here's item type is directory, name is demo, the path is going to be this folder, what if is set to true. So now I can say new item at folder args. And because I set what if to true, it's going to say, well, this is what would have happened if I would have created that folder. But that's splatting. It's taking a hash table of parameters and their values and passing it to whatever commandlet or function you're attempting to use. And it's just keeping the code minimized, basically. Instead of going this way with it, you're going this way with it, because your brain naturally can read down code a lot easier than it can read side to side. So once you get to like 80 columns, it's a really good idea to split that off into a new line, because your brain is just naturally going to follow going downwards rather than left and right. And it's really easy to lose track of where you are too, if you need to scroll to the right to see stuff. But yes, it is mainly for readability and reuse, absolutely. Yeah, I can post the URL to this stuff.
Yeah, we'll make sure that gets sent out with the recording link as well.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and put it in the chat here as well. So we've got it, but there you go. Just to show you there was no smoke and mirrors on any of this. If we go back to this pipeline and look at the all and go to the YAML one, and we go to edit, I clicked the view YAML button on the GUI one and pasted it in here and created a new pipeline. So this is the Cody way to do that pipeline long term. But again, I set it up in the GUI, get it right, test it, make sure everything works, and then steal the YAML and just edit the YAML over time as I need to tweak and change things, etc. It's just way easier for me to develop and do that way. If you can do YAML in your sleep, that's freaking amazing. You're awesome. Keep doing what you're doing. I can't. I suck at YAML. I don't like YAML. I'm glad there's an easy button for me to get YAML. And the pipeline YAML file is in the repository. So if you go out to that beautiful docs, go to the develop branch, it is the Azure.yaml. So it's in there as well. There is also not Git version. Give me a second. GitHub.workflows folder, main.yaml. There's a version for GitHub Actions as well. I haven't tested this one yet, but it's pretty bright, I think. But yeah, you should be able to at least run it in a GitHub action and see if it breaks. And there is a make docs action already. Somebody wrote one that does the trick with this thing where they remove the remote and add it back in with a token and all that good stuff. That's what that action does. So I just replicated what that action did in Azure. But that's what that's doing there. So you should have pretty good coverage for CI/CD if you're new to this sort of thing and want to kick the tires on it. You can absolutely borrow those YAML files, and it should get you at least most of the way there. All right. There any other questions? Doesn't have to be documentation related. It can be related to anything you want. I'm happy to hang out and shoot the breeze and talk PowerShell, talk chocolatey, talk whatever.
I noticed for your build.ps1, you used a switch statement with the switch parameters as opposed to just a bunch of ifs. Is there a particular reason you did the switch instead of ifs?
It's cleaner. It's just way cleaner for me to use a single switch statement set to true and just say which switch did I use. And then my individual steps can just say, hey, run build.ps1 with this switch, with this switch, with this switch. And whatever that is, whatever you passed in evaluates to true. And then that triggers this to run. So it's just a cleaner way of writing that code. It could absolutely be done with ifs. Have I applied this technique to other languages or project types? I write PowerShell pretty much exclusively. I do some C# work, and we have a similar process for generating documentation for that code base. It's different. It uses different tooling, but the documentation is somewhat auto-generated in the same way that this is auto-generated, yes. But again, Platypus will work with C# commandlets. So if you're writing PowerShell in C# and want those external help files, you absolutely can do that. And there is an extension for make docs. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but that will allow you to do versioned docs as well. So if you want to keep your docs versioned as you version your module, I would recommend adding that extension on to make docs, and it will just magic its way through it. So the same way that you can go to the PowerShell docs website and see documentation for version 4, 5, 6, 7, blah, 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 you can do the same thing with make docs. It's a little bit more involved if you want to do versioned docs, but it from the really quick look that I gave it, it didn't look overly complicated. It's just adding a little bit more config to your make docs template YAML file. Anything else? Like I said, happy to stick around and talk about whatever.
Seems like you might have covered all your bases. That was a great presentation. You definitely threw a lot of content into that. That was that's something I do with a Python project that I have as well. I generate all the documentation using Sphinx, and that gets pushed up to read the docs. So getting all that in your repo and having the documentation right next to the code is it's one of those things that almost solves, but it doesn't quite solve, but gets very close to solving the process problem of keeping your documentation up to date, because that's a human thing, right? Like at the end of the day, you still have to update those comments, but if you make the process of getting that documentation updated a lot less, have a lot less of a barrier of entry, then it's much easier for all of the developers to stay on the same page and keep the documentation up to date.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are means and modes that you can use inside of PowerShell to gate yourself from releasing something that doesn't have docs. You can easily test commandlet-based help with Pester, and then you can gate your PRs with checklists and things like that to say, hey, I've updated the docs, and only after all the checklist items get ticked off can the PR be merged. So they have to check the box, but your Pester tests have to validate that there's online documentation available for every parameter that's in the function. So if somebody adds new functionality and didn't document the new functionality, the test fails. And then that blocks the merge. So there are ways to reduce friction with a bad release as well through testing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a standard that we should all be adopting moving forward.
Yes, absolutely. I would agree. Especially since, I get on my soapbox again, but I really think that user experience starts at the docs. Like as soon as they hit your README, the user experience starts there. So if your docs suck, the whole thing sucks, in my opinion.
Absolutely agreed.
Do you have any resources that you've used to teach other people PowerShell, and not just the PowerShell over lunches, but the actual how do you explain to someone what a hash table is?
Have you heard of the PS Quants project?
No.
Joel Sallow, that works at hold on, Bing. Forgot I was in Edge. PS Quants Vex 32. So Joel works for us at Chocolatey, but before he started at Chocolatey, he started authoring this PowerShell module called PS Quants, based off of another, I think it was F#, the language F# does a similar thing, and it uses Pester to teach you PowerShell. So it's a module full of broken Pester tests that you have to fix to make the test succeed. And in doing so, you go through all the stuff, there's comments and things like that, and you really get an understanding for the language itself. It starts from the very beginning, like this is a string. This is a string literal. This is an interpolated string that accepts the variables, all that good stuff. And it just walks you through and keeps growing and growing and growing. And by the end of it, you're really good at PowerShell. This is a fantastic resource to use. And I know of people that have taken their teams and sat them in a room and done training sessions using this module and stuff like that as well. This is really, really good. I would highly recommend that you take a look at it. And if you feel inclined, you get a lot of use out of it. Click that little sponsor button because Joel deserves it. He's an awesome dude.
Thanks.
Yeah. Anything else? Like I said, doesn't have to be docs related. Can be literally anything. You've got me. I am all yours for as long as you want me.
Well,
Well, if I can ask a question, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I
no,
apologize.
go for it. No, you're good.
Now, what is it like? At my job, we use Chocolatey. So I was just wondering, what is the environment like? Like, I mean, I don't want you to give anything away. I'm not trying to ask you to give anything away or any, but like, what's the work culture like? Like, what's the environment like? I mean, I've heard, I've seen like, I've heard good things about the place. I mean, I'm not looking for a job there or anything. But I'm just curious, like, what's the environment like there?
This is the best place I've ever worked. Hands down. We have the people that I get to work with are so smart. Like it's refreshing to not be the smartest person in the room all the time. And it's definitely true. Like it's just so much fun. And we'll have a wild idea and we'll just run with it and see what we can do with it. And there's definitely process involved and everybody's a team member. Like we all share the load. If one of us fails, the rest of us fail. It's very, 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 very team oriented. It's fantastic. Absolutely love it. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen too, by the way. Realized I was still sharing. But yeah, it's a great place. I absolutely love it. And make sure you upgrade. We just released 0.11.1 yesterday, day before yesterday.
Have you had any experience dealing with large enterprises and like, okay, so often you have this thing nowadays, I feel like, where everyone just downloads everything on demand from the internet. And it's like, okay, but like I work, at, say like an organization that doesn't like doing that. And so any scripts I run are running from an internal server that's like probably a management server, not my desktop. So like, how do you deal with trusting random people's code that's often thousands and thousands of lines? You never have any chance of ever actually going through it.
That's a process. At some point, you have to trust but verify, and that's what sandboxes are for. Run it somewhere that you don't care about in an ephemeral environment to make sure it doesn't blow stuff up and works the way you expect it to. Vagrant is an awesome tool to use for that stuff. You can write a Vagrant file that spins up an ephemeral VM that is configured like for one of your VMs on your network, and then you can have the Vagrant file also pull down that module as well and install it, and then play with the module there. See what happens. Once you're happy, send it into production. But you could also, have your own detonation testing, virus scanning, that sort of stuff that goes on as well. It just depends on what kind of process you want to put in place in front of it. I've dealt with organizations that only allow signed code. So gallery modules, the vast majority of them, off limits. They have to roll their own. which is another way to do it as well. You could bring down a module from the gallery, say use save module, and store it in your own internal source control system, which allows you to investigate the code, make changes to the code, make it yours. If you've got a code signing cert, you're then able to code sign those scripts with your code signing cert and then publish them to your own internal PowerShell gallery, like your own NuGet feed, and then configure your clients with that NuGet feed so the install module installs from there as opposed to the gallery. So that's another process as well. If code signing and code integrity is that important to you, that would be a process that you could look at as well. And I've seen that before, or at least heard of it before. And I'm still waiting on for Google and the Linux Foundation to GA that new SIG store thing that they're working on for code signing. They're doing, basically it's Let's Encrypt for code sign certs, which is pretty wild considering how expensive code signing certs usually are.
That would be awesome.
Yeah, I don't know how expensive or how long-lived they're going to be. I have a feeling that the certs are only valid for like a few minutes. So you have to like request it and sign, and then you can't use it again. But it's still better than paying a buttload of money for a code signing cert.
What is a code signing cert even? I mean, I understand you can sign code, but then like you're not going to just trust all the software that someone wrote with Let's Encrypt code signing cert, right? Like
no, you wouldn't. No, you wouldn't. I mean, at some point there's just a certain level of I'm going to have to just trust that this does what it says it does. There's really no way around it other than testing it manually or writing some crazy pester test to wrap around any module that you want to use to validate it, and then testing it against at least a machine in your environment that's similar to production machines. So like a UAT or dev environment or an ephemeral throwaway thing. You have to have that human verification of the stuff that's coming from the internet. There's no way around it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have one of those repositories. I forget which one.
Yeah, I always
so
recommend
to download to it. It's just that I always got to be careful because if I recommend it, and
yeah. The last time the gallery went down, I wrote a PowerShell script that takes any PowerShell module from the gallery and turns it into a Chocolatey package and stores it in my own repository. That way I don't care about the gallery going down anymore because it seems to be going down a lot. So that's
have you ever written a VS Code?
That's another reason to bring that code internal as well. Like if you rely on that code a lot from the gallery, you don't want all of your machines going to the PowerShell gallery to install that module. Bring it internal so you control it better as well.
Have you written a VS Code extension before?
I've contributed to one, but I've not written one from scratch. No. We have a Chocolatey VS Code extension that I've done some work for.
Yeah, it's weird when you're not really a JavaScript developer and you feel like everything in the world is. And like you can read it and write it,
Yeah.
but as far as actually like designing something with it.
Yeah, and TypeScript's weird. It's really it's all based on promises and it's very truthy falsy. It's an interesting language. It took me a little while to wrap my head around it for sure. right. Well, Matt, I think if nobody else has anything else,
No,
go
I
ahead
think.
and wrap the recording.
Yeah, I think that was a lot of good discussion.